Hello everyone, today I'm doing another OverDress deck profile, this time on Phantom Blaster Dragon because I cannot let go of my Dark Dragon Lord of Destruction. It's a very generic Cater Sanctuary deck, and way more budget than Bastion if you want to get into Cater Sanctuary at the moment. Now, to Sorceress, maybe not. But anyway, so how this deck functions is like you call a bunch of rear guards, like the old Phantom Blaster Dragon would, and then you sacrifice them to do some shenanigans. That's basically what it is. So there's also two builds on how you could approach Phantom Blaster Dragon as well, at least for the encounter version. The first one is the Blaster variant. That's like the main archetype one, where you would play a bunch of blasters and a specific grade 3 when it gets retired, and then you could boost up your blaster units. The other one is just the more generic variant, but also probably a little better and probably a little more expensive. But if you want to play more budget, I would suggest the blaster variant. But other than that, let's begin. We of course start off with the ride deck, with of course Fubao, because this is Shadow Paladin related. Could play whatever star you want, but matching stars is the best. And then you go to Blaster Javelin. So Blaster Javelin, its skill is when your Blaster Dark rides on top of it, you can call the top card of your deck as rest. That call as rest doesn't really matter because you're going to interact that with Blaster Dark. But second skill, it gets 2k power if your Vanguard is Blaster during your turn. You will mainly use that skill if you're playing the Blaster variant of the deck most of the time. Although sometimes you will be calling this from Soul because your Phantom Blaster Dragon has a skill that can let you do that. But most of the time, for many of the generic deck players there, it's only the first skill. And then, of course, to go up to grade 2, you of course go to Blaster Dark, where when it's placed on Vanguard, you can counter blast 1 or retire one of your rear guards, and then retire one of your opponent's rear guards, and then it gets Twin Drive. So that's why, like I said, it interacts with Blaster Javelin. When your Blaster Dark rides on top of Blaster Javelin can call the top card, and then Blaster Dark retires that for its Twin Drive. And even if your opponent has no rear guards, I would still do it, because that Twin Drive can be very valuable. But anyway, Blaster Dark also has a second skill where it gets 5k power if you retire a rear guard during the turn. It's just there. You will be retiring your own rear guards for Phantom Blaster Dragon, so that's guaranteed to happen. And then to your boss unit is of course Phantom Blaster Dragon, where when you ride it on Vanguard, you can call Blaster card from your soul. You have 2 targets right on first ride. Most of the time it's going to be Blaster Dark, but sometimes it will be Blaster Javelin just for a booster. And its second skill is once per turn, you can counterblast 1, retire 3 of your rear guards, gets plus 10k power 1 crit, and then retire 2 of your opponent's rear guards. So that's not too bad, but of course it requires some setup, so obviously you're gonna get a bunch of call cards before doing that. But at least that this new version of Phantom Blaster Dragon has some control, unlike the V version where your opponent gets to choose, or the original where it doesn't even have that. And now to the main deck. Since Persona Ride, you obviously have to run your other 3 copies of your main Vanguard. And one thing you can do is when you do the Persona Ride, the Phantom Blaster Dragon that is now in your soul, you could just call that with the first skill. So you can always do that, so you got that value as well. And then for one of the debate cards, depending on which variant you play, I play Forsado. This one is debatable depending on what variant you play. If you play the Blaster variant, there's another grade 3 that you would play instead of this. But mine is the generic variant, and I would be running 4, but at the same time I don't really like this card, mainly because it has an attack hit skill. But it has a skill where it cannot be targeted by your opponent's card effect, which is of course very valuable. And the other skill is when attack hits, you can counter charge 1 and soul charge 1. This deck uses both counterblast and soul charge. I just do not like the attack hit condition on it. I would be also running 4 copies of this because this is actually the only way you can get those resources back at the moment. But they're like $15 each, so instead I'm substituting 2 copies at the moment. If you're running the Blaster variant, run the Blaster card instead, and if you also want to play budget, same reason. So that's it for the grade 3 lineup. For the grade 2 lineup, because there's no other better cards right now, I run the other 3 copies of Blaster Dark. Cater Sanctuary is one of those nations who lack good grade 2s, unless it's all about grade 3s for that nation, because Bastion. So the only other better grade 2 right now is really Blaster Dark, and it is a 15k attacker, which attackers you do kind of need in this deck because you're going to be retiring 3 rear guards for Phantom Blaster Dragon skill, which is usually your boosters. And then to continue off, I run the Darkness Maiden Maka. So Maka, when you place on rear guards, gets plus 5k power if you're a Vanguard's Blaster. And then you can Soul Blast 1 to retire one of your rear guards and then Superior Call 1, grade 1 or less from the top 5 cards of your deck. I don't like the trade-off of needing to retire one of my rear guards for that, but sometimes you can replace it for something better, so there is a purpose for this, and you can always just place this and just give it 5k power and not use its other skill. This is the only card that uses Soul Blast, so Soul Blast isn't too heavy. You can almost guarantee to get this off every time. I just don't like the trade for one unit for another one. And then for my last grade 2, I run Calpald. This is a grade 2 definitely made for this deck, because the skill is, when placed on rearguard, you can counterblast 1 to rest one of your units, and then look at the top card of your deck. If it's a unit card that is not grade 3, you call it. If it's not, you put it to your hand. So regardless, you will get a plus out of this, which is very nice. And the only point of doing that is obviously because it gives you a resource for Phantom Blaster Dragon. That's why you run this. Now, counterblast is a little heavy, so most of the time I do not really go for this, but it's just there to help you out with your resources. And now to the grade 1 lineup. So in place of the 2 copies of the Forsado, I run Male Coco because Forsado is $15 each, and I am definitely not getting 4 copies of that just to replace 2 copies one day. So instead I got this, grade 1, which when you place it, you can Soul Blast 1 to draw a card and then discard it. It's better than the Angel in many ways because it's during an on plays, which means that you can still filter. Unlike the Angel, where it has to be at the end of the battle. Because in Phantom Blaster Dragon case, you're going to be sacrificing your rear guards. So at least that you can filter out before you do the sacrifice. Now, if you want to go for the 4 Forsado, I would definitely replace these 2 for the 4 Forsado. And if you're going for the Blaster variant of the deck, replace these for Blaster Javelin. Because obviously you want more blasters for the Blaster variant of the deck. And then to continue off, you must run the 4 Karens in this deck. Because Karens, on plays, if your Vanguard is Blaster, you can rest it to call the top card of your deck, and then retire it at the end of the turn. Obviously, the retire at the end of the turn is not a problem, because Phantom Blaster Dragon is going to be sacrificed in that unit anyway. So it's a must-play 4 of. And then another must-play 4 of is Brunner. This card can count as 2 retires for your Phantom Blaster Dragon. So it saves up your resources, and that's the reason why you would play 4. And keep in mind it's also a 5k unit, so if you're playing premium, you can use this with Nemen. And finally, for my last grade 1 is obviously going to be the PGs, because PGs you always have to run. And then for trigger lineup, over trigger, no questions asked. And then, of course, the 7 crits, 4 draws, because every resource helps. So the draws are more valuable than the fronts, especially when you probably can't get the full value of fronts when you're going to be retiring your own rear guards most of the time to play Phantom Blaster Dragon skill, and sometimes you have an empty column. And finally, 4 heals. So that's it for this deck profile. It's just very simple and generic. It's also much more budget than playing Bastion if you want to get into playing Cater Sanctuary for Overdress, and it's also pretty fun. Now, I would say it isn't a very strong deck yet, because most of the time the introduction of a new archetype for any game is usually the weak side of it until it gets more support in the next booster set. I mean, take a look at all the 5 great ones, so keep that in mind. So who knows? There is, of course, a lot of potential future support for this archetype. I just hope that they don't focus too much on grade 3s with Bastion, because that's something I'm really starting to hate. And if you also want to play Nostalgia, definitely play Phantom Blaster Dragon. And there's also, like I said earlier, you could of course play the Blaster variant of the deck, so it depends on you. If you want to go budget, play Blaster variant. If you want to play the more generic build and spend a little more money, definitely play the Forsado. It's really up to you. But other than that, I had fun with this deck. I hope for more better stuff, and I really cannot let go of Phantom Blaster Dragon. Time to say goodbye.